So thank you everyone to be coming. I just need to start a time up for my phone because I don't have access to feedback from my notes. Well, first of all, I would like to first thank you all the Troopers crew for this conference. You are doing an incredible job, and I really appreciate spending time with you. And I will do my best to spend as much time possible with you. So I'm David Baptiste. I'm finishing my PhD last year, and among the different topics I've covered during my research stuff, I worked a lot on keyboards and anti-keylogger solutions. So the goal of today is to offer you a little journey inside keyboards world, especially under Windows, but for people who will be angry against Windows, I have a good news for you. The spirit, the philosophy should be the same under Linux or macOS, since we are talking about hardware, etc. We are going to apply these very old principles, which says know your enemy. And our enemy of today's talks is keyloggers. Keyloggers are based most of the time on keyboards, but not only. And for these things, we need to know how works keyloggers. And to know how works keyloggers, we need to know how they work internally. So we are first knowing what is the keylogger's environment, how it works internally. So this talk is, in a way, a sort of Windows internals focused on keyboards. So we are going to cover from the moment when you press a key on a hardware keyboard, what is happening from an electronics point of view, to the moment where the character is displayed on screen on Windows. So this is our journey. Hope you are ready for that. And keep in mind that keyloggers is a threat coming from, I would say, something like 30 years ago, and it's far to be solved today. So the approach we want to do with all this presentation is to open a discussion on how we could enhance the protection against keyloggers, not by trying to detect them with technology and stuff like that, but much more like following the data flow, understanding how works the system behind the stage, to be able to provide the security to this data flow. So let's go. First, let's talk about keyboard technology. Here is a keyboard. This is one of the first keyboards provided by IBM, so the layout should be a bit different. Now functionality keys are on top, etc., but this is one of the first keyboards. I propose you to remove all the keys on top of keyboards. So we've got access to sort of little points, little dots on the keyboard structures. All these little dots are composed by armor. On a hammer, traditional armor, you've got the top of the armor and the handle. In our case, it works upside down. So it means that the handle is on top and the hammer part is on bottom. And what is happening is when you are pressing a key, you are pushing on the handle so that the bottom part is touching a plate, which will activate the printed circuits. So there is a one-way function between every armor in the mechanical keyboard and every connectors in the printed circuits. So what is happening is that between the two, we've got a metal plate, which is pressed by every armor, by every keys on the keyboard, so that we can activate any points in the keyboard by itself. And then what is interesting for us is the two printed circuit components here in the keyboard. On top right, we've got sort of matrix of keyboards. Actually, what is happening is that all the lines in the main printed circuits of the keyboards are linked directly to a sort of multiplexer, so that each time you press a key on the keyboard, there is an electronical signal which is open, like an on-off button, and there is directly a signal which is multiplexed in that matrix key view to generate a code which will be handled by the keyboard. This is a way we recognize every keystrokes on a keyboard. Then, once we have recognized internally which keys have been pressed, we are still in analogical world. This is only electronical signals we have. So we need to make the conversion between these electronical signals and to code which will be understandable by a computer, a numerical world if you prefer. So this is the aim of this microcontroller. Historically speaking, it has been an Intel 8048 microcontroller. So it's a very old CPU in a way, but it's very convenient for what we are going to do, which means just translating from analogic to numerical and send the code through the wire. So let's sum up everything. At the beginning, I've got a keystrokes, which push on the metal plate, which make contact with the printing board circuits, which makes the connection with the multiplexer, and this multiplexer transfers information to the microcontroller. Microcontroller does its stuff of computing to generate a code. This is the code which will be sent to the keyboard, so it goes from the printed circuits, the wire inside the keyboard, the wire outside the keyboards, and here we are connected to the computer. Well, we've talked about codes that the keyboards can generate. Historically speaking, from the times before you've got your keyboards with USB, Bluetooth, and blah, 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 we use PS2 technology. Does it ring the bell to someone in this room, PS2 technology? Yeah. So sometimes you can still find some in industry. So this is very old technology coming from 1983, which has been evolving after time to a different scan code set. So it's a set of codes which says that this character should be displayed by this codes, etc., etc. Well, at the beginning, the keyboards was not with the same layout as ours. There are less keys comparing to ours. So this is why there has been an extension of every scan code at the beginning. Officially and technically speaking, every hardware manufacturer of keyboards can do its own scan code. Still, it translated to one of these scan codes which could be understood by an operating system. So that's the point. But mostly, we are still using the scan code set 1 for backward compatibility. Well, so how the keyboard can be handled directly in the system? We have seen for PS2 connector, but nowadays, this one is obsolete. If we have time and if you have questions about, I have a couple of slides about how it works internally for those who are a strong passion for all new things. And on the other hand, we have two other ways to connect keyboards nowadays. We've got with Bluetooth and radio connector. And on the other ways, we've got USB connector. And both of these technology are linked to another technology which is called HID, Human Interface Devices class. This is a sort of new standard which makes that all your keyboard, mouse, etc. will always interact correctly with the system. And for short, Bluetooth is just an overlay top of USB protocol, but by radio, not by wire, to give access from specific device to HID protocol. Well, we talk about USB, so let me just introduce you how works USB for short, and because it's much more complex, but just local view. At the beginning, when you plug the USB device into the computer, what is happening is there is an address resolution, a bit like TCP/IP if you want. And then the device identifies itself with the device descriptor. This is where you've got the device number, the vendor number, product ID, and the functionality with class and subclass of this device. But most of the time, especially for keyboards, this information which says I'm a keyboard is irrelevant. The operating system doesn't care about, really. And all these values, by the way, are just values that can be fake very easily, I talk for forensic point of view. Then after the device descriptor, the USB device is going to send a configuration descriptor. The configuration descriptor is mostly used for the way the device is powered, if it's self-powered or bus powered. Self-powered is linked directly to an electricity tape, and bus powered is powered directly by the USB tape directly. So usually with keyboards, it's bus powered. Then we've got the most interesting part from my point of view, it's interface descriptor. For each interface, this is a feature that is provided by your device. Let's take, for example, a phone which will be connected by VoIP. On the phone, you've got a keyboard. This is one feature. You've got one screen. This is another feature. And you've got the phone by itself when you can talk and hear voices. This is another feature. So for each feature that your device can provide, you've got an interface descriptor, right? Easy. And because each features can have different possibilities, we can have what we call endpoint descriptor, which is everything which will be in, out, setup for every features. So it means the features can have input, output, and setup configuration. So this is not hard stuff. In a way, you can see the device descriptors as ID cards, configuration descriptors, how it's powered, interface, which functionality you propose, and endpoint could be the same equivalent as port from IP, TCP, IP view, the same way. So this is how USB works. How it's handled by Windows. So at the beginning, you've got an host controller and root hub, which is the driver, which is, from a software point of view, responsible to handle every USB stuff, like giving an address, powering, etc., blah, blah, blah. This is not so relevant. When it becomes a bit more relevant is that after you've got USB class, which gives you the number of the protocol of USB. If you are USB 1, USB 1.1, USB 2.0, USB 3.0. For keyboards, most of the time it's 1.1 or 2.0. Why not 3.0 or 4.0? Well, I admit that it's very hard to type characters such as gigabyte per second. So normally it's not possible for normal human. So that's why hardware manufacturers don't use such expensive protocol. In Windows, there is two device driver stack, one for old USB below 2.0 and above 3.0. This is another device stack they are using on Windows. Then we've got USB port, which is all controllers port, which is responsible to identify device driver, if it's a keyboard, if it's stuff like that, etc. Then we've got USB hub, which is sort of representation of the logic hub controller of your computer, where all devices can talk directly. And then we've got a very central point, which is called USB CCGP driver, which manage all functions in a composite devices. So taking back to the phone, you can have the phone describing by 3 devices, virtual devices, the screen, the keyboard of the phone, and the phone by itself. So this is exactly where you can create what we call a PDO, physical device object, which will be linked to different drivers. And then if you are a true USB driver, you have 2 possibilities. Either you are going to USB regular class driver, so it could be for USB storage, USB sticks, stuff like that. Or you can go to HID USB driver. It's when the device has a physical connection with human, like with a video game controller, joystick, keyboard, mouse, etc. And then this is directly the application, which is taking care of the USB data. What is relevant for us today, it's HID USB, since it's supposed to handle modern keyboard. As I told you, HID stands for Human Interface Devices. Actually, every device, including this one, and I'm pretty sure half of what I've got in front of me in this table, are HID devices. It's when there is a contact with humans. And this standard is very interesting because it's what we call a self-describing interfaces. Remember 10 or 20 years ago when you were buying a new device, such as a keyboard, a USB stick, or a dongle for Wi-Fi, with the devices was provided a little CD-ROM or DVD-ROM, which handles a lot of drivers to use your new devices. Remember that? Who now is still using this CD-ROM? Almost none of you. And it makes sense, because nowadays when you have a new device, you plug and it runs directly. Magic? Not so much. It's due to human interface devices. Actually, this protocol is done to allow every devices to describe themselves directly in the system, so that we know exactly how do they work. It means that what works before will works after. This is a very, very important point from a system point of view. It means that, more directly, my keyboard describes itself to the system. It explains to the system how it's going to work with the system. This is no defined convention, if you want. This protocol will allow that your device works from tomorrow, for yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And I'm pretty sure that in 100 years, we will still use this technology because it's so convenient and it allows every device to be plugged and run directly on the system. Figures are better than a long discussion. How it works? Actually, we are not exchanging as USB packets, but we are exchanging reports. We have just changed the name. Actually, it's still USB packet, but we've changed the name, which makes a new technology in a way. The first thing the device is going to exchange is what we call a report descriptor. This is the only structures which will be known, so that the device can explain to the operating system how it's supposed to be handled, where I will put the keystroke content, where I'm going to put the LED values, where I'm going to put, I don't know, when you press this button, it will be this offset in memory, this button, this offset in memory, and so on. So this is how it works. So to give you an example, Normally, it's just you see hexadecimal data which has exchanged, but you can parse it and get much more text values. Of course, the operating system is using that with a parser, but for human readable stuff, it's much convenient. This is my keyboard at home, so it's composed first of 1 byte to get what we call special key, control, shift, etc., key modifier, if you prefer. There is 1 byte for padding, to be aligned with 8 bits memory. We've got 3 bits for LEDs keyboards, so numlocks, the log for shift, etc., caps locks. And then we've got 6 bytes to buffer the current and most common keystrokes. So when the operating system is reading the HID component, it's going to generate on the flight the equivalent of these 2 C structures. 1 for input, modifier keys, reserved, and keystrokes. 6 par 6. So it means that when you press keys, they are sent 6 par 6 normally. If you press only 1 keys, it will be 1 and full of 0 for the others. But this is exactly the spirit. Very short question. What's happened if I press 7 keystrokes in a once? Easy. Actually, it will return here a sort of code which says, I cannot handle it anymore. So it's a dead code, which is supposed to say to the keyboard, do nothing, and to the operating system, there is a problem with the hardware. You can try at home to press more than 6 keys. You will see nothing will happen on screen. And we've got an output structures which give us the state of each LEDs in the system. So you see, the structures are defined from what the device expects to communicate with. So how is it handled in Windows, such a thing? All it's happened in HID class driver. This one is supposed to take from bus driver, which is transport information, Bluetooth, USB, and other device protocol transport, to take the HID components and deal with these components. This is exactly this thing. By the way, for your information, you can try to be a filter in that part. This is not mandatory and not easy to do, but if one day you want to filter, but you should not, because HID is self-describing protocol. It should be generic, not to have a specific drivers between. So as I told you, transport protocol, HID class, which is quite linked with HID parse. This is sort of driver library which help for parsing operation. As I told you, the operating system must understand how it works. Otherwise, you can directly interact with this driver with an application. For instance, you have a device which is supposed to be only with this given application, comes from industrial world. Or the other possibility is to have a generic driver HID client, which can represent any device uses HID. And in our case, let me introduce you keyboard HID.sys driver. So we're going 1 step up. This driver is supposed to retrieve from the parsing HID the content of what has been parsed. So it means scan code. At the beginning, I told you we have 3 scan code coming from PS2 technology, but there is more. There is one more with USB HID technology which provides another scan code set. And guess what? Microsoft use only 1 scan code in the end. What is very surprising is when you are reverse engineering these drivers, you are going to see that this routine, HIDP translate usage and page to I8042 scan codes, is called. This routine is typically used to make the translation between USB HID protocol to PS2 protocol. Why? Backward compatibility. A lot of systems during years have used both PS2 and USB stuff. And a lot of old applications are still reading directly scans code set and not characters or stuff like that. This is why they have decided to make the translation into the old scans code set. Actually, it's not the true scans code set 1. It's an extended version of scans code set 1 with the new keys which has been added from time after time to the different keyboard layout we have today. So that's the story behind what is happening. And what is interesting is that this routine is called by 2 main routines. Routine is function for kernel mode, right? It's keyboard HID read complete when an operation read is complete. I mean by complete that the operation read comes from the hardware, not is being requested by the system, but comes from the hardware, which makes sense. You cannot read if there is nothing to read. Okay? You need to read when there is something which is happening. And keyboard HID auto repeat, it's when you continue to press a key and it's automatically repeating. So this is exactly how it works for keyboard HID. So the translation is done through a lookup table. So you've got the index of the entry of the array and the equivalent scan code from scan code set 1, and you've got a direct access to this one. So the translation is very fast. It just reads the array and gives out output directly. Great. How does it work internally, such a thing? Well, at the beginning, we've got keyboard HID system drivers. This is the driver which is responsible to handle what we call an IRP read, interruption request procedure read. It's an order given by the driver to make the operation read on all the subsequent drivers. Okay? So that when something is happening, for instance, from the hardware, a key is pressed, information is going up from the hardware to the HID transport, USB, Bluetooth, etc. We are now fluent with that. And back to the HID class for parsing operation, and then it's going back to keyboard HID. And since the parsing of HID has been performed by HID class, we've got directly access to the content of the SCAT code with keyboard HID read complete routine. This is this one which is supposed to handle the content. And by the way, this routine is initialized by keyboard HID initialized state reads, which engage and re-engage every read operation. It means once a key has been read, it's automatically re-engaging the same way it has been engaged the first time. Okay? So that you can continue to use the keyboard. Don't be worried about time lapse. You are not fast enough typing in the keyboard to have a talk to on such a thing. Well, once we have talked with keyboard HID, we need to talk with the keyboard driver. So it means that somewhere in memory, there is a link between all Bluetooth transport, device transport, HID class, HID keyboard, and keyboard class, which is on top. You see? So we are going one step above. You see, to have a generic keyboard. Why we have a generic keyboard? Well, it's because you can have keyboards coming from PS2 which are still connected in the system. You could have one keyboard from USB and one keyboard from PS2, and they are all linked to keyboard class. One important thing about keyboard class is that it's not handling as before with IRP, but it's handling with a callback. This callback is quite interesting because it's providing if you register your driver inside the driver class of keyboards. So it's just a couple of registry keys to change in the system. You should be admin for sure to do that, but this is only that. And at the beginning, your driver is notified through an I/O control request with internal keyboard connect, where this keyboard class service callback is providing to you. So this is how different technology of keyboards are talking with the main driver keyboards in Windows. Okay, great. From a technical point of view, for those who are interested, much more from routine point of view, it's initial start read operation, keyboard class in HID parse, the rest of the system, which is HID class driver, by the way. The translation by itself, keyboard read complete, which re-engage the read operation thanks to the translation, which is going to recall initiate start read. And then it's transferred to callbacks to keyboard class service callback. You see? So it's quite simple in a way. So now we've got something coming from the driver keyboard, the driver keyboard. We need to have access to this information in user mode application because this is where the character should be printed on screen. So to make this transition from kernel to user mode, let me introduce you a new characters in our journey story, the raw input thread, RIT for Intimus, which holds all message system used by graphical user interface processes. Okay? This is as simple as that. The raw input thread is one of the most oldest components in Windows. And if you remember maybe in your Windows internal courses you could get at university, this is one of the few exceptions of kernel mode thread which is not held directly by system process with process ID 0. This one is held by crss.exe. The source code of raw input thread is held in Windows 32K driver, which is responsible for graphical display interface. And it's initialized at boot time by crss.exe and directly executed. And this is this raw input thread which is responsible to provide orders to the keyboard driver so that he requests keystrokes from it. Let's see how the raw input thread is going to broadcast information to the different applications. At the beginning, we suppose we have 6 keystrokes providing directly by keyboard from the keyboard class drivers. And the raw input thread has inside itself a system hardware input queue. This name is not officially used by Microsoft, but it's for convenience use between you and me for today. And actually, there is no name for that. And the row input thread is going to extract all this information and is going to send them to every application thanks to a virtualized input queue for each application. Of course, it can do that for every application. And if your application is relevant enough, it will get all the keystrokes directly taken. And then there is a specific thread in the application which is going to extract every message one by one. If you have one day check that you run an application, console application, just hello world, and that's all. You put a debugger on that, and you check the number of threads you've got. You've got, of course, the thread executing your main routing, your entry point. And you've got two other threads. And one of these two other threads is the thread responsible to handle these messages. That's all. And then your application is getting access to the message, can hold the message, a key has been pressed, you should refresh the screen, etc., etc. Great. For short, the row input thread is a big house. There is a lot of things inside. It's possible to handle hotkeys. It also handles extra button on tablets, soon off, soon less, more, reboot, etc. Message application on screen, when you have this screen is not responding. This is the row input thread stuff to deal with that. And it's about using clipboard management. For short, copy and paste, Control-V, Control-C, right? The row input thread is initialized one per session. On Windows, when you are starting the operating system, there are at least two sessions. Session 0, for holding most system services, including automatic booting time services on Windows, and your session of users. The goal is that in case of corruption between your session and for a service in your session, it cannot corrupt another service in the other session. So it's for security purposes. In one session, there is at least one Windows station, but this point is not so relevant for us today, and which holds different desktops. We can consider that per session we have 3 desktops. One for WinLogon. WinLogon, you know, this is a UIC, when we are requesting from you the password. And by the way, UIC is only valid when they are requesting a password. If there is just yes or no, there is no security. So don't use that. Just ask the password anytime. So this is WinLogon. The second desktop is for screensaver, when your machine is in sleep mode. And the last one is the desktop you've got from everyday use with all your icons and Windows display from different processes. So you've got 3 desktops. And what is happening when you press Ctrl-Alt-Del is the row input thread code, which is handling it by itself. So do not try to intercept Ctrl-Alt-Del. It cannot work because it's managed directly in the kernel. And is going to perform a switching desktop from one desktop to one desktop. This is why when you are going to print on the screen the UIC, you have the feeling that all the windows have disappeared. They do not have disappeared. We have just changed the desktop. And doing that, there is a system isolation between all desktops, which means that if there is a process recording every keystrokes in the desktops, it cannot record the keystrokes of another desktops, at least without administrative privileges. So this is the security. This is not perfect, but this is a very good base of security. Okay. From very short, because we don't have so much time, the read operation is performed thanks to ZW read file kernel routine. And one thing which is very surprising is if you consider the 3rd and 4th parameters, APC routine, APC context, they are documented in the Windows documentation to be reserved and should not be used. Actually, this is one of the few times that the operating system is going to use this technology, is to make a read operation, but a waiting read operation. It means we are going to wait in an asynchronous way until an operation is available, which means when we receive a keystrokes. So this is exactly the technology we are using here. And once it's done, I give to you the list of routines which are involved by. There is a transfer buffers from kernel mode to user modes thanks to ALPC and direct memory access in crss.exe, which is supposed to broadcast all the information. So let's sum up everything to have a clear mind for all of us. First, Win32k with the row input threads initialized by crss.exe is going to perform a EIP read operation on keyboard class. The same time, keyboard HID drivers is going to do the same operation on HID class system, right? And then this is operation with the hardware. We've got a notification, HID class makes the translation, HID keyboards takes the information, use the callback keyboard class service callback, keyboard class drivers, use a requesting IRP read operation, give it to the raw input thread, which transfer to crss.exe. Here's the journey we've got. Well, management of keystrokes contents. Now we have only scans code coming from the keyboard hardware. But, as I told you, for keyboards, the scans codes can be defined by the hardware manufacturers, which means that any manufacturers of keyboards could have its own code. It will be hardly manageable for every developers to detect each keyboard and make a code specific to each keyboard on the planet. So Microsoft proposed to you something which is called virtual key code, so that every time you press A on a keyboard, it will be identified as an A in the system. Great. How is it possible? First, there is a translation from scan code to virtual key code to have a universal key representation code. This conversion is in two-step procedures. The first is to normalize the scan code received with map scan code routine. And the second procedure is to take this scan code and convert it to a virtual key code thanks to virtual key code from virtual scan code and internal map virtual key code X routine. So this is internal stuff from Microsoft. It's highly undocumented. From the beginning, I talked to you, it's highly undocumented, by the way. But this is the procedures. And if, by hazard, you will have a scan code which is not recorded or recognized by Microsoft, the operation fails, and the key is judged to be invalid. So in this case, the keystroke is dropped and simply ignored by the system. If we have time, please keep in mind this information. Scan code invalid, dropped and ignored by the system. It's like a push assembly operation I asked you for today, okay? And if we have time, we will take it back at the end. Okay, so how does it work internally? All this conversion is based on what we call keyboard layout. You know, French, English, German, Japanese, South Korean keyboards are all different. Some are AZERTY, they are good, and some are QWERTY from another world, okay? And we need to understand each other. So to do that, we use keyboard layout operation. But by the way, if you are checking in the Microsoft official documentation on MSDN, you will see that the new name input local identifier. This is exactly the same technology, but sometimes from time to time at Microsoft, we change names to change the technology. It's exactly the same, but the name has changed. It's better. And it takes into account especially modifiers keys like numlock, lock shift, etc., etc. And maybe I can illustrate you how does this conversion. Remember numeric pad? Everyone knows that? Yeah? Great. If the numlocks is off, it means that I use arrow, home, page up, page down, insertion, deletion, etc., but not the numbers directly. So when I press a key, this is this table, which is used at red, which corresponds to this virtual key code. And as you can see, 25 here corresponds to left arrow. This one, 4 numbers in the keypad. But if, and there is a conversion for all of them. But if I switch on nums lock, now this is this table which is used. So the conversion, thanks to the keyboard layout, takes care of many tables like that to make the conversion depending on how your keyboard is configured. By the way, for fun facts, this numlocks has a story behind. Maybe if we have time at the end. Well, we have understood how it works in simple case, the translation. But the translation can be a bit more interesting. First, you've got a scan code coming from the hardware manufacturer, which is converted by the operating system in virtual key code, and which can be converted into characters. The last operation of conversion is done thanks to 2 Unicode routine and 2 ASCII functions. No, these 2 are functions. This is user mode function. So anyone can call them internally. I advise you to use 2 Unicode because, for instance, with German language, you've got umlaut, S-set, and to do that, you need to make a sort of combination in the keyboard. I'm coming from France, and I've got pretty different accents. We like to emphasize on characters. This is exactly the same. So the conversion, in one way, is always possible. On the other way, it should be possible. But sometimes, for one character, you can have different sequence of virtual key code. So in this case, Microsoft uses only the simple one he has in memory. So the translation is, by the way, automatically done by the raw input thread. So this is only if you want to redo manually the work of the raw input thread. That's all. Now we have seen how it works for translating to have the character on screen, Unicode of ASCII. Let's see how it's broadcast to the other application in a simple way. There is two main ways to do things: the synchronous message and asynchronous message translation. The message system is the backbone of the keystroke transmission here in the operating system. It's managed directly by the raw input thread. I told you the raw input thread is the main character of our story. And all this information is provided by him, even the asynchronous system which relies on it. When an application wants to get access to the keyboards, it only uses the API I'm going to present to you. There is no other way to interact with the keyboards. So this is how do regular applications, but also malicious one, because they are using exactly the same way to record from keyboard, right? So let's see what they can do. First of all, let's make, for instance, a little experience. Imagine you've got Notepad on screen and you press A key. We all agree that A character should be displayed in Notepad, right? But not in Outlook or Firefox at the same time. You don't want to corrupt any application when you press one key. It makes sense to all of you normally. So it only means that the character is provided to one application at a time. So there is a sort of distribution privilege. Actually, there is two privileges. What we call the foreground thread, you remember the thread which is responsible to handle all messages coming from raw input thread? This is this one. So the foreground thread is for the application which should be present at top of the screen. So this is from the kernel point of view. You see, the notion of foreground thread is very close to kernel point of view, kernel glasses. And another thing is, in a process, you can have different windows inside. Things about GIMPs, for instance. You have many windows just for different menus. And in this case, you should know in which window to give the character inside the same process. So we have the notion of focus property. So to get a character displayed on screen, you should have first the foreground thread property, and then the focus property. Let's see how we can do that. So this is the rule. Keyboard messages are broadcast to foreground thread and windows with the focus. How it's possible to have the focus? You can call internally, so this is kernel mode routines, undocumented for sure. X-axis show windows, set active windows, minimize, maximize windows, mouse activate is when you click on it. But you can remove this property by destroying a windows or hiding a windows. Simple. For foreground thread, the case it's a bit more complex. Either you can switch desktop, you can deal with direct messages, you can use remote desktop protocol, because remote desktop protocol, you have a keyboard linked by network. Still messages, you can destroy windows, you can create windows, you can change the focus of the windows, and you can decide to show the windows on screen. And in the end, you will call CITP process foreground change. This is the main routine responsible to give you the foreground properties to your thread. Once you've got the foreground properties and the focus, you will receive a message. What is a message? It's a value. It's a 32-bit value, 4 bytes for Intimus. And this value has specific fields which gives information about what it's supposed to do. The two most important messages we are talking about is WM keydown and WM sys keydown. System keydown is for Windows keys, Control, Shift, etc. And WM keydown is for all the other keys. By the way, if you want to get access directly to HID content, you can use WM input. But it's not so common to see such a thing. So we have two ways of doing that. Let's first focus on the synchronous access. Synchronous access, it means when I've got a message sending me the information, hey, there is a keystrokes, I can use get keyboard state or get key states to know if there is another keys which has been pressed at the same time. So this is a bit more tricky to use, but normally legitimate software, and especially libraries like Qt, etc., are using this technology because it's much more smooth. It's it's only used when it's necessary, when there is a keystroke, etc. This is normally the good way of doing things. The bad way of doing things is to use it by asynchronous access. Do you remember focus foreground? Didn't get any point about that? You're welcome back. It can be totally ignored with asynchronous access. It doesn't matter the notion of focus or foreground thread. You are just testing with this function, which is almost the most famous of keyloggers world, the virtual key code of every keys on your keyboards. So you've got from 0 to 255, which means 256 possibilities. You make a loop, a little slip inside the loop so that it consumes too much CPU. It's not very stealth, you see? And you've got sort of balance between CPU consumption and efficiency. And you can listen any current, it's only limited to the current desktop. You cannot go on WinLogon desktop with the UIC if you prefer, for security purposes. But this is a very efficient way of doing things. The most popular one, by far. Efficient, don't matters, focus, very good. By the way, it's still based on the row input threads internal structures, okay? It's still managed by the row input threads. There is no magic behind. Another way of doing that, but I will be quite fast, is to use set Windows hook function. It's hook procedures. It tends to be slow on the system, so it's not so common. But it has been very common on Windows XP, with 3 main type of hooks, called Windows Proc, keyboard, and keyboard low level. By the way, the two are almost the same today on Windows 10. 2 less famous, WHCBT and journal record. A bit more tricky to use, but it can be usable anyway. So, about keylogger, the 2 last possibilities you could have to make keylogger. One is to use specific libraries like Qt, SDL, OpenCV, TK, GTK, etc., even Python, Perl, Ruby, etc. All of them are using finally the Windows API. So we already know that stuff. It's just an overlay of code, so it's okay. But there is other technique which bypass the message systems. They directly bypass the row input thread, like DirectX. Actually, DirectX has a kernel homemade level library which bypass the row input thread to directly provide keystrokes to an application, but it's not free. In this case, you cannot get access to the keyboard layout. But it's okay for video games, because in video games, you have a sort of pad, you can move, etc. I don't know, for instance, W is for going forward, but it doesn't mean W in the real life, okay? So it's not a big deal for video games, and it's much more faster than using the row input thread. This is why they are using this technology. It's not so common we've got keyloggers with DirectX technology, but it's a very good way of doing one, by the way. Well, we've got a total view of how it works, the Windows kernels with keyboards, and I hope the journey was cool for you. Now it's time to talk about keyloggers by themselves. Let's go. We have 2 types of keyloggers. First, the keyloggers in themselves, and then we will see some defense which exists today about keyloggers. So keyloggers, 2 main possibilities, hardware, software. You remember my keyboard? Let's go back for a little trip. Let's focus first on the tape of the keyboard. For PS2, you can have one small frame between your computer and the wire. And this one is supposed to record everything between your computer and the wire. Not so stealthy, and a bit old. You have the same with USB, and you see this is very convenient. And of course, you've got all the size, all colors, strong marketing inside. But you see, it's not so stealth. You can always see them. Okay, no problem. We can put directly the keyloggers inside the tape of the wire. Oh, it's not stealth enough for you. Okay. You remember wire? You can try to capture electromagnetic fields provided by each keystrokes through the wire. You should be close, by the way. It's much more theoretical attack or laboratory attack, but it might be possible. And even stealthier, you open the keyboard, you change the firmware of that microchips. It's perfectly documented by Intel. And now you've got a keyboard with a new frame with you. Smooth. So this is how it works for when you have a direct access to the device. But sometimes you cannot get direct access to the device. It's not stealth enough, and you have many risks to be taken physically. And it's not good for you. But you can count on wireless keylogger. From the documentation of wireless, it's supposed to be 6 feet perimeters of broadcasting, which is about 2 meters for normal people using the normal metric system. In practice, with the good antenna and strong feelings, it can be up to 100 meters with the good antenna and the right direction to capture wireless keyboards. So from one building to another building. Perfect. And if you think this is encrypted, you will be disappointed. Microsoft in 2008 has updated such protocol, but for old keyboard, which are still produced, by the way, the encryption can be very weak, not to say inexistent. Another way, acoustic. When you press a key, click, 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 there is a different noise per key, because we are not using all the keys the same way. They don't have the same quantity of plastic, etc. So we need to have different sounds for every keystrokes. And it works pretty well with a bit of data mining, artificial intelligence, and any good keywords like that. We've got quite good results. But against hardware keyloggers, we should have a conclusion, which is if someone can gain physical access to your computer, it's not your computer anymore. So in a way, the best solution to protect you from this type of keyloggers is not to let your computers alone, really. Or you lock it, do something, but it's impossible to, or hardly possible to manage these things. There is a solution, by the way. So if we cannot act on hardware level, let's try software level. 3 level, firmware, kernel, user mode. For firmware, we've got UEFI firmware. What is UEFI? Unified Extended Firmware Interface. This is the new BIOS, or new. Normally, all of us should have UEFI, and none of us should stay in BIOS. It's too hard, normally. UEFI is seen on 2 parts. First, on the motherboard, directly on the chip, which is very hard to compromise, but if you can do that, you can survive to reboot, reinstall, and blah, blah, blah. And the other way, on the hard drive in the boot sector operation. And the goal of the malware is then to compromise the operating system when booting, adding to the operating system a little program, which is supposed, for instance, to record every keystrokes. Very hard. Another possibility is to use a driver. You remember how it works from this strip? You can first try to intercept keystrokes between the raw input thread and keyboard class. And for instance, there is control to cap, which is Mark Rusinovich drivers. Mark Rusinovich now is the head of Windows Azure, but in former time, it was a guy which made all the sys internal suite softwares. And in its keyboard, during when he was a teenager, if I remember well, the control and the caps keys were reversed, vice versa. And to come back to what he knew before, he decided to write a little driver responsible to handle every keystrokes, and when there is control, replace it by caps and vice versa. So it was a convenient way of doing that. And this driver is open source, public. If you don't want to do as Mark makes the replacement, you can remove replacement part and just write into a file every keystrokes in the system. You've got a keylogger for very cheap. But this is not enough. You can always use the keyboard class service callback. And there is a sort of tutorial, KeyB filter, which is provided by Microsoft as a Windows driver framework driver. It's on GitHub. You can use exactly this driver to inspire yourself to see how to interact with this callback and add new features inside this driver. This is very popular for malware also. You can be below, between keyboard HID and HID class. It's a bit more tricky. It's not documented, and since it's not documented, there is less people to play the game. So normally, there is very few malware doing that because you need to reverse how it works, the structures pass behind these 2 drivers. So there is very few people at that level. And even less people to the previous level, it's before HID class. In that case, you need to pass by yourself HID. And remember, HID is supposed to be a self-describing protocol. So it's not a mass port to write a reliable driver at this level. And last but not least, I remember you from Windows XP 64 bits, all drivers must be signed. So using drivers is no more the best things for doing keyloggers. Well, and we have already seen how it works in user mode with the different API I've presented. This is exactly the same for malware also. So let's talk about how to mitigate this solution. Historically, antivirus vendors have tried to detect malware, to say this malware, this program is a malware, this program is a goodware, etc., etc. Why not? It's a good first line of defense, but it's maybe not convenient for antivirus. Why? Well, as I told you, keyloggers are just regular software reading from keyboard. The only difference is what they are doing with what they've got from the keyboard. But the problem is much more about philosophy. It's much more about spirit rather than technical solution. They are using the same API, the same instructions, the same things. They are doing exactly the same thing. So make the difference between red and red. Good luck. It's not possible to get perfect results. Maybe a better solution would be to mitigate consequences during execution. It's a complex problem, but maybe it's possible to try to neutralize them. Let's see how. In practice, there are many solutions, and the most popular one is to perform jamming, decoying, if you come from academic literature, the same way from jamming. The goal is very simple. At the bottom, I've got a fake keystroke generator. So it's not a real device, it's a virtual device driver, which is supposed to send fake keystrokes, random numbers if you prefer, to the rest of the system, so that keyboard class drivers looks to receive real keystrokes, and the rest of the system is flooded by random keystrokes. Smart and great. You've got two possibilities of doing that. The first is to have a local solution. You will protect only a certain number of processes. And the other solution is to have a global solution. You will protect the whole system in once. It doesn't work, but that's another story. For local system, it's very simple. When your application takes the focus, remember this probability focus? When you take the focus, you are knowing that you are going to receive keystrokes. So in that case, you are notifying your driver it's time to flood. The driver is flooding. And you, inside the thread loops, there is, in your library, a nose factory which is synchronized with the driver, so that your DLL of protection is able to subtract the noise, the flood, if you prefer, to the normal keystrokes. But all other applications listening in asynchronous mode, because they don't have the focus, they cannot make the distinction between noise and real keystrokes. And this is quite efficient. But this is not perfect. You don't protect against ring zero attacks first. And then, if the malware author are smart enough, they can reverse your application and check how you synchronize with the drivers. And if you can synchronize with the drivers, they can synchronize with the driver too. So it's sort of right. It doesn't work. For global solutions, the goal is simple. When I type with the keyboards, the physical keyboards, no flood. When I stop to write with the keyboards, every flood. But it doesn't work. Because in this case, you've got user keystrokes, decoy keystrokes, user keystrokes, decoy keystrokes. And just with a very small calculus of entropy, for those who know that, entropy of Shannon, you can directly make the distinction between clear text and ciphered text. So it doesn't work. So another solution is to use dynamic layout. You remember when you go to bank account, etc., they provide to you a sort of keyboard, very ugly, with strange character, etc., and it changes every time you type. Convenient? Really? Yes, you find that convenient? I don't find that convenient at all. It's painful. It ruins the user experience. Actually, this is good for very short text, like password. But remember, passwords are stronger when they are very long. And less convenient it is to use these things, for instance, this one or this one, less convenient it is to use these keyboards, and more encouraged you are to reduce the size of your password. Okay, get it? So by updating the security of the anti-keylogger solution, you are reducing the security of your password because you don't want to type a long password with that. And come on, for confidential documents, go on Word with that. Please go on. Show me how you do. I cannot. So it's not convenient at all. And by the way, this security is good only and only if you are not famous. If you are not famous, malware authors don't matter about what you are doing, so they ignore you. But if you are very efficient, you are becoming famous. So malware author will know how you are doing. They will directly DLL injection in your system and retrieve what you have entered with your smooth, smart, blah, blah, blah. Display keyboard dynamic layout. And that's the end of the game. You've lost. You can restart from zero. That's a pain. Another solution is to use hypervisor. For short, hypervisors are able to manage directly the memory from the kernel and the hardware. It's a very short resume, but I have not so much time. And the idea will be to focus every time the kernel is touching scan code or virtual key code, etc., when it is, and this operation could be performed by the hypervisor itself. Since it can only be one hypervisor in the system, That will be very nice. But the operating system are not designed for that. And with Windows operating system, you should reverse all the journey of keystrokes in the kernel as we do today. And things that in case of update, you could have terrible consequences because all offsets could have been changed. And if all of change has been changed, you can redo everything. And this is just for kernel. Imagine for each application is different. I should reverse every application to be the bodyguard of the data in memory. This is maybe the best solution from a theoretical point of view, but it's definitively not practiced today. And by the way, on Windows 10, there is, with virtualization-based security, there is already an hypervisor layer, so you cannot add your own hypervisor. So maybe Hyper-V could try, if there is Microsoft guys in the room, maybe think about providing us an API to get direct access to the keyboard managed by the hypervisor directly. It could be a cool stuff, I think. Well, the most popular things to do is to use a ciphered parallel communications channel. I like this solution. You are doing like DirectX, you are skipping raw input thread totally, and you are making a parallel side channel talking with the services, and for more security, you cipher everything in your new communication channel. Well, this is the perfect definition of illusion of a security. There is no security inside, not a single bit. Why? Let me explain you the situation. If there is a parallel communication channel, ciphering is superfluous. Why? Because there is two possibilities. If anyone can access to this channel, ciphering or not, you can directly access to the memory of the application which is using this secure channel and retrieve the cipher keys. So it doesn't work. So you need to have a protection. Which application is protected by default against any DLL injection to retrieve cipher keys in memory? Administrators. That's cool. And if you secure your channel with administrators, only administrators can access it. It doesn't make any sense to make ciphering inside. It's just marketing, at best. Oh, maybe at worst, in case of dump, of the crash of the system, blah, blah, blah. Yes, why not in case of dump? But your cipher keys are dumped on the system too. So there is no real security. Actually, this solution might have an explanation. The explanation is quite simple. It's because they are ciphering keystrokes. When you are ciphering, at the beginning, there is only a subset of possible values, less than 256, you remember, of scanscode possibilities. And since you are ciphering, you are now all the possibilities from 0 to 255, sorry. And in this case, when it's handled directly by the raw input thread doesn't know some keystrokes because they are ciphering. This is not in its database. So it's going to drop it. So that's why I think they have used a parallel channel, because they don't know how to handle properly ciphering keystrokes so that the raw input thread cannot reject them. Too bad. Well, to conclude, because I have only 1 minute, if I remember well, there is no perfect solution, but we can do much better. And as I've seen yesterday, top 5 is highly appreciated in this room, so I will try to do the same. First, malware detection is too limited to be doing a great job. Keyloggers are just regular software using the regular API to do bad purpose. And yes, bad guys do bad things, surprisingly. So this is more on philosophy side, and maybe the idea is much more to have a keystroke data flow security as a bodyguard for that. Then design software of secures at the beginning by design. And by design, not only using that framework, this language, and blah, 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 but no, what we are doing with data, why we need this data, and how we handle this data, how they are given to us, the input, not the parsing, how it's enter in the system. This is another big problem. Do not perform in DLL injection when you are using this type of solution. Nobody expects you. Most of the targeted software are not ready for that, and in case of, you can make crash the application. This is a huge source of instability. DLL injection should be done in a very smooth way. As I told you, maybe a better API could be a solution. Number 3, protect protected application. If you have a debugger, you can always read cipher key and directly get access to the memory of the process handling the keystrokes directly. So we should avoid debugger. Administrator is not a solution to protect anything because all applications should not run with administrator privilege. It's not safe at all. So we may think about DLL injection, but that's another story. 4, Secure your protection system. Sometimes it's too easy to deactivate your own protection system. But there is a balance between protection of your protection system and user rights. After all, it's the user's machine. And you cannot prevent the user to uninstall your system, even if your system is so great and amazing. And number 5, and that will be the last, work for your users. Even if you have a golden features which is so brilliant, so genius, etc., but it ruins the user experience, it's not good. You should keep the user experience intact. Do not use undocumented API. All this talk is about a lot of undocumented APIs, so don't use it directly in your software. It could move in case of Microsoft updates. And maybe I think the main important thing is to know how the system works, to have a strong knowledge of the system. Because of this strong knowledge, we can bring visibility to data flows and not just loss preventive and system reliability. And on this word, I can thank you for your attention. If you have any question, I'm here for you.
Thank you. We have time for one short question. Is there one question? Yeah.
You were talking about that flooding where you have the keystrokes and then the.
Can you remove the mask, please?
Oh yeah, sorry. You were talking about the flooding thing where you have the keystrokes and then there's no flood and only afterwards there comes a flood. How long is that delay approximately? For example, if you type and then it takes a while because I mean.
I didn't get your question at the beginning.
So there was that one picture where you had the keystrokes and then the artificial keystrokes, and they were like kind of going. Well, first the keystrokes and then artificial keystrokes, and there's no flood when you type. There's only flood afterwards, and then you said there's a delay, but how long is that approximately?
The delay of keystrokes. Oh yeah. Okay, it's much before. Okay. When there is a read operation which is engaged, it's a single IRP read operation. But you are typing on keystrokes, even if you are very Superman of the keyboard, it's about milliseconds between different keystrokes, right? And the system is much faster than you from a CPU point of view. That's why the system is not designed to have parallel communication with the keyboard. There is a single IRP. There is a single communication stuff with the system. So there is kernel mode drivers, for instance, the root input thread, which is engaging things, and then the rest of the system, which is engaging things. And at worst, what is happening is that your keyboard can keep in memory the last keystrokes to provide them after. And this is the same from the system point of view.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.